Hello and welcome everyone to Flight Station. Thanks for joining me. Today's episode is about the resources that you may need to pass the Canadian Private Pilot License written exam. Before I get started, just a little bit about myself. I'm a student pilot with a commercial pilot license, and I have a few ratings to go with that as well. I've recently finished my multi-engine IFR rating, and I'm currently working on my float rating. I started my training in 2018 and currently now it's 2022. So it did take me 4 years, but I was working full time in the field of IT before I got started with pilot training. And what I did was I pushed pilot training on a part-time basis and I kept my job on a full-time basis. So all my flight training and preparation for any written exams took place after hours. So for example, weekday evenings and weekends, Saturdays, Sundays were all taken up for training. Before I get started on listing out all the materials that worked for me for the private pilot license written exam, I do want to mention that I am not an instructor. These are suggestions of materials that have worked for me, and using this, I was able to achieve a pretty good mark on the private pilot license written exam, and that's why I'm sharing it with any new students that want to start studying for the private pilot license exam. Also, the materials that I'm going to be mentioning were specifically useful for me because I was a part-time student, not enrolled in a college or university program. I was part of a flight training unit here in Oshawa, Ontario, and having materials that I could study online off of were very helpful. So if that applies to you, I think the list would be a perfect fit. But that isn't to say that if you are part of a college or university program in aviation, you can't use some parts or the entire list that I'm about to present. Okay, so without any more further delays, let's get started. I've broken it up into 3 sections for you. The first section is the ground school. The second one being the books and the text materials you might need. And the third section is miscellaneous. So any other resources that you might need to be successful in the PPL written exam. All right, let's get started. The first part of this video is ground school. And for ground school, I used a product called pilottraining.ca. Very good product. I would recommend making an account before getting started. It's free. Once you make an account, you can sign up for a demo course or the actual course that you're signing up for. Say, for example, private pilot license course, and that's $275 Canadian dollars. Well worth it, every penny. I highly recommend the course, and especially because in aviation, if you're doing it through a flight training unit, structure is something for your studies. Structuring your course material is pretty much on your own, unless you have a syllabus, and that's what this gives you. On this course, it gives you a syllabus and something to follow as a guideline, and through each of these sections you've got videos and quizzes and study material, references to the book that you need to study, and the page numbers, etc. And all you really need to do is pay $275, which is a pretty affordable, I would say. For $275 you get the entire course, and it's all you really need to pass the private pilot license written exam. I will talk about a few supplementary books and materials that kind of bolster your knowledge, but this is well worth it on its own. Just showing you a sample course here for the night rating, for example. This is how you would access like the slides. Go through the slides at your own pace, or you can watch the video. I highly recommend watching the videos, at least for your PPL. Aaron does a very, very good job laying out a strong foundation for you to learn things that might be very new to you. Like, for example, myself, I knew very little about meteorology. So in Met, it was a completely new ballgame for me. I come from an IT background, so learning that from Aaron was very helpful. I don't think I would have picked up on all the nuances of weather if I wasn't taught the way that Aaron presents on all the MET modules. And for the price that you pay, the accessibility online on a PC or a Mac or a tablet, having audio running in the background while you're commuting, or just watching the videos wherever you are. I used to watch it on vacation, is well worth it. And at the very end of the video today, I'll talk about study strategies that worked for me, and I can guide you through how to approach the course once you sign up for it. So the first book I would recommend is the Bible for flight training, which is From the Ground Up. Now this is the ground portion, so the written exams purposes, you need this book. There's another book for all the flight training. I'll talk about that in the flight test video, but you need this book. And sometimes it could be a cure for insomnia, but this is the book that any flight training unit would recommend for you to take a read at. And from pilottraining.ca, there will also be references to this book, so you can do your reading and then go watch the video and do all the sections in pilottraining.ca, which is very useful. But this is a must-have, and at the end of the video today, I will talk about where you can purchase this book and where I purchased my books from. Now, for the written exam, the Sharper Edge Solutions book, the Private Pilot Exam Preparation Guide, is not a must-have, but it's a very, very nice to have book. I went through all of pilottraining.ca, the entirety of the ground school. I felt very confident in my knowledge of everything I needed to know for the private pilot license, the written exam, and also air exercises. They have air exercise sections as well. But that being said, after you cover about 50 plus hours of videos learning about something that's completely new to you, aviation, you want a book that just focuses on getting you ready for that written exam, that paper. And that's what this book does very well. So it's very exam focused. It's an exam prep guide. It is what it says it is. And it helps you solidify the knowledge that you need from the ground school. So you could just go through each section and do the practice tests on this book and at the end of this book. And it also has quizzes. And I promise you, it's well worth the purchase. And in the future, other licenses and ratings, I also recommend this book. I'll talk about that on the other videos, but a very, very concise, helpful book that is a must-have in your toolbox to get ready for this exam, in conjunction with the ground school. And I think both of those together, you should be ready. You should feel ready for the written exam. And I know there are other products out there, like the Culhane's book, is out there, and there are other ground school like the Hanger, etc. But these are the two that worked very well for me, and I'll tell you how I used both in conjunction to study for the written exam. Okay, for the first miscellaneous item, I want to talk about the E6B. I am recommending the good old whiz wheel, as it's called, for your PPL purposes. Once you get really good at using this and you've used it for one of your exams, or if you want to use the electronic one in parallel with this, sure, but what I'm trying to say is get good at using the good old whiz wheel first, and PPL is the right time to do it, and try to do the exam with just the whiz wheel, and then move on to electronic computers. The next one is the ruler, the good old ruler to measure on any VFR charts, for example, on sectionals, and you can pick this up from any aviation store. The next thing you want to pick up is also the aviation protractor. Now, keep in mind that you can actually find all these three products, the protractor, the ruler, and the E6B, in packages. So I would highly recommend looking into packages that have all three to purchase as a bundle. And then finally, any charts or Nav Canada products that you might need. So any CFS, Canada Flight Supplement, VTAs, VNCs, and also the AIM, which I don't have on the screen, but those are a few handy things to carry in your flight bag. Also for reference. Now, one thing I do want to mention is down the line, you're probably gonna want to get a subscription for something called ForeFlight, and it's an iPad or an iPhone product. It allows you to have all these books and charts as part of your electronic flight bag. And the subscription, the yearly subscription fee that you pay for the basic package, kind of gets offset if you were going to buy these books and charts individually every iteration that they had a new one for. So it's well worth a look when you're, let's say, finished your PPL, you want to move on your commercial license. You might want to start investing in these newer products. But to start off with, you can even borrow some of these from the school. Schools always have CFSs and AIMs lying around that you can use or borrow and give back. All right, let's talk about some tips that I have on studying for the private pilot license written exam. And to start off with the ground school, I would say do the ground school twice. Why? Because you can. The first time around, it will be a lengthy process because there are a lot of videos, a lot of quizzes within each section, and then practice tests in each section as well. It does take long. It will take you about a couple of months, to be honest with you. It did take me a couple of months. And once you do that, get to the finish line, right? And then the next time you do it, you can fly through the slides instead of watching the videos. You can just scroll through the slides and write down. I'm a big believer in writing things down for them to stick to you. And a lot of the slides will have sections that say know this or this is important. Write those things down in a notebook, and title them with sections that these were the important things in section 1A, 1B, etc. And that's really important because this is going to be, you're going to thank yourself at the end of the entire second round of watching or watching the videos or going through the slides. You'll now have your review text that you can just look at your notebook and study off of that. So it's very, very helpful. And then another recommendation I would make is the second time around is the only time when you do the final exams. So at the very end, there are about 6 to 8, I believe, exams, sample exams. I would say the second time around is when you do those exams at the very tail end of being done the entire course again. It's well worth it, and it will help you in the long run because PPL, like I said, and I keep saying it over and over again, it is the foundation. So, and I felt like it was the foundation. It was, I would say, the toughest exam that I've done out of all of them because it's completely new to you, and you want to be able to absorb as much knowledge as possible during your PPL and get to know everything from the ground up. No pun intended about the book, but you want to do that for sure during your PPL. Up next are all the books that I asked you to purchase. I think there are a couple. Flight from the Ground Up and The Sharper Edge. Let's talk about the from the ground up first. This book, you can't get away with buying it. And that's important because every flight school, every flight training unit will ask you to buy this book. It is a very good book, and I read on pilot forums, and a lot of airline pilots also say on the forums that they refer back to this book from time to time as a refresher. And they say that because as the saying goes, a good pilot is always learning. So it's a very good book in that regard, and I would say pick it up and go through the sections that are referenced in the ground school. So your pilottraining.ca ground school will have page numbers on it that refer to this book, and you can just simply read those pages or those chapters. That should get you ready for at least the private pilot license written exam. Now, that isn't to say that you shouldn't read the entire book. I would say go ahead, read it, because you are going to need that knowledge eventually down the line when you're getting your other licenses and ratings. Coming to the other book, the Sharper Edge book that I talked about, after you've done the 2 runs of the ground school in point 1 here, you want to jump into Sharper Edge. That's because you did all your foundational work. So you've done the ground school, you know a lot more than you did before you started. You read the from the ground up book as well to gain a lot more knowledge. Now you want to focus in on what you need to know for the written exam. And that's what Sharper Edge provides as a product. You can have one read through the entire book, highlight anything that's marked as important. It's going to be in the book. Do all the chapter quizzes within the book, and that should give you an idea of how or what the exam needs you to know in order to be successful. So before I go into any more study related topics, I just want to mention that doing some flying is very important during your ground school portion. So as you're studying on the ground extensively for preparing for the written exam, and it's very important to do so. I know a lot of my friends have gone into a flight school and they overinvested their time in the flying portion. They got ready for the flight test, but the written was nowhere in sight. Which is a bad situation to be in, because you're now going to have to study a lot of ground stuff, and it could get boring if you're just doing that on its own. So try and do it in parallel. Get a lot more ground studying done and the flight test out of the written exam out of the way, and then go full tilt on the flying portion. But I would definitely recommend doing some flying during this time. Now, you may have noticed in point 1 and point 2, the ground school and the Sharper Edge book, I didn't mention any practice tests. I did talk about quizzes, end of chapter tests, but not the practice tests. It's because I recommend that at the end of your studying, when all the studying is done and you feel pretty confident, is when you do all the practice tests in the ground school, so in your pilottrain.ca, and then you also do the practice tests in the Sharper Edge book. And that should make you feel very confident. If you're getting above, let's say, 80 or even 75 and higher in Sharper Edge and pilottrain.ca, that should make you feel confident for the private pilot license written exam. And additionally, I would say do the practice tests maybe a week before, or even if you can, 3 to 4 days prior to your scheduled written exam with transport. That's because it's going to be fresh in your mind. It'll give you some time to review anything that you get incorrect on the practice tests. Finally, I do want to share a few bonus tips and tricks with everyone. Starting off with purchasing of books. Please buy used books. It'll save you a lot of money. Kijiji is a good resource to get the books from. And then if you're starting your flight training during Christmas time, New Year's, take advantage of Boxing Day. Companies such as, or stores such as AvWorld and Threshold Aviation, VIP Pilot, they give about a 10% discount during Boxing Day. Take advantage of that. And then also, when you're doing your private pilot training, I think I already mentioned this, but you should try to get the ground written out of the way as soon as you can. That's because it will actually give you a boost, because the written exam for PPL, I believe, is a little bit tougher than the flight test. Obviously, it can differ from person to person, but for me, the ground portion was, because it's a lot of on the ground studying and it's not the fun part, it was tougher. So I would definitely get that out of the way. And lastly, during your PPL, you're a fresh new pilot, or a student pilot rather, you're starting to learn. My last tip is, don't let anyone bog you down. So I remember that 99% of the people that I'm a big believer in speaking to everyone at the school, because you learn from others, and you learn from others' mistakes, you learn from others' correct actions, etc. But there were people out there, and for the most part, everyone was nice and everyone was very helpful. But there will be one or two oddballs that will make, and the way I put it is, they will make aviation or pilot training seem like rocket science, and it might feel like you're overwhelmed, and they might make you feel like you may not achieve it. Keep those conversations short. Speak to them for a maximum of 30 seconds. Once you realize that this will bog you down, try to avoid that conversation. I believe if you put your time and effort into it, you can achieve it. It's not rocket science. So with that, those are all my tips and tricks for the study guide. So there you have it. All the materials that you need to be successful in the PPL written exam. I hope this was really helpful for you. I wish back in 2018 someone had given me a finite list of study materials. I had to make one myself by asking people, talking to people, speaking to my instructor, speaking to other students, and then just conducting some research. And I ended up spending a little more money than I should have. That's simply because I bought books that I guess I didn't need. My next video is going to be about the PPL flight test, and it will cover things such as what to expect on the flight test, what book you should use, and any other details that might be helpful for the flight test. Thanks for watching and joining me on Flight Station. Goodbye.